Now we're ready. Is it okay?
Okay, it's fine. And Robin, if you want to be in this, that's great. But okay. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. John LaPook, Chief Medical Correspondent for CBS News, and welcome to CBS This Morning podcast. Today, I am beyond thrilled, all the way to incredibly thrilled to have Norman Lear, who in full disclosure is my father-in-law, Kate Lear, who in full disclosure is my wife,
And my daughter.
Alan Zweibel, who in full disclosure is just one of the great guys, a new friend in recent months, but who has written a wonderful book that I just finished reading, and we're going to be talking about it. But first, the quick intros, I'll just Google them. No, I'm not going to do that. Norman Lear is a television and film writer-producer whose dynamic career in Hollywood has encompassed both the golden age and streaming era. At 97, almost 98, next month, Norman Lear has no plans to retire. Yada, yada, yada. You know everything about Norman Lear. He's done everything under the sun and more. He's done All in the Family and Maude and Good Times at Jefferson, Sanford and Son, Mary Hartman. He's done more things than you can wave a stick at. He flew 52 combat missions over Europe in World War II. He's been a social and political activist. He's created People for the American Way. He is a Kennedy Center honoree, a recipient of the National Medal of Arts in 1999, Peabody Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016, a member of the inaugural group of inductees in the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 1984, has won 5 Primetime Emmys and a Golden Globe, is a father to 6, grandfather of 4, and the husband of Lynn Davis Lear. Alan, what have you done?
Well, I've done stuff that you can wave a stick at. Okay. Compared to, you can take any stick you want and just start hacking away.
Alan Zweibel is somebody I knew before I met him because I was such an admirer of yours from your work on Saturday Night Live. He's an original Saturday Night Live writer, and that doesn't just mean that he's original as a writer, but he was a member of the very first year. He's won multiple Emmy and Writer Guild of America awards for his work with a bunch of different things. It's Gary Shandling Show, which is hilarious. He co-created that, produced it, and he's done work on the David Letterman Show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. You've seen him everywhere. I saw 700 Sundays, which was an amazing collaboration he did with Billy Crystal. It won a Tony Award. It was a play about Billy Crystal's life. Martin Short's Broadway hit Fame Becomes Me, and the off-Broadway play Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of romantic comedy which he wrote about his best friend. They were best friends, Gilda, and he's written 11 books, including the 2006 Thurber Prize winning novel, The Other Shulman. A lot of popular children's books, Our Tree Named Steve, and a parody of the Passover Haggadah named For This We Left Egypt. How was that read?
Pretty good. But if you do it that way again, I think they're going to send us back to Egypt. So I would, towards the end, the question mark I would lower a little bit.
Okay. For This We Left Egypt? Okay, thank you. He co-wrote that with Dave Barry and Adam Mansbach. Anyway, you've read about him everywhere: New Yorker, Esquire, Huffington Post, Mad Magazine, which is the most impressive to me. He got an honorary PhD from State University of New York. And the reason that what started this all off is most recently he wrote a cultural memoir. I want to say this slowly: Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. And it was just published. There's a movie that he co-wrote with Billy Crystal titled Here Today, stars Crystal and Tiffany Haddish, and that's going to be released later this year. But the production that he's most proud of is his family. He co-produced with his wife, Robin, their 3 children and 5 grandchildren. So Norman Lear, Alan Zweibel. I am leaving out, last but not least, Kate Lear, who is my wife, was a production of Norman Lear, is the board chair of Ballet Hispanico, which is an astoundingly important and
culturally significant.
Thank you. culturally significant ballet Hispanico organization in New York. Anyway, she co-produced our two children, Daniel and Noah, and I'll let her talk more about herself as we go, and all of you. So that was a long introduction, but I think for those people who are just joining us and don't understand who the heck anybody is, that's there. Now you can fast forward to here. So we'll start here. The reason why I wanted to do this was that I read this book, Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier. I read it a couple of days ago in one day. I don't laugh out loud very often, and I was laughing out loud. It is hysterically funny. But what really made me want to do a piece was that in the middle of the book, in various places, everything's hilarious, but what was so poignant to me was he started talking about his failures, about things that just bombed. He'll tell you about them. But they came, it wasn't just that they bombed, it was they bombed, and then there was a message in them. There was picking himself off the ground afterwards. Even talking about Gilda Radner and how she got sick. There was picking themselves off the ground. There were lessons to be learned. Norman's autobiography is called Even This I Get to Experience. And you would think that Norman Lear, with everything he's accomplished, all those things, that the title would be referring to, even this I get to experience, all the Emmys, all the shows, the movies, got an Academy Award nomination, all that stuff. But that's not what it refers to. It refers to an incident which I will let Norman tell. And that's how we'll start this off. And then I want to talk about...
You're counting on Norman to know what you're talking about.
Oh, I'll quickly say it then. I know. The story is this. Years ago, Norman invited me to a brunch at Sarah Beth's kitchen. And in the middle of it, he sits across from me. He says, John, you're not going to believe this, but I think in about a week or maybe two, I'm going to be bankrupt. I said, what? He said, all of these financial investments that had to do with buying TV stations. Anyway, it had all gone south. And he said, I think I'm going to be bankrupt. And then he took a beat and he said to me, am I crazy to be thinking even this I get to experience?
Wow.
It was a wow for me, Alan.
Wow.
Even this I get to experience. And thank goodness, like there was some change in a law that made the lightning strikes that made the TV stations or radio stations 10 times more valuable than they had been. Anyway, it all came back. But at that moment, sitting across from me, he says, even this terribly low point I get to experience with what, Norman? What was that about, that statement?
That, even this giant bit of trouble, which didn't, by the way, come back fully the way we just got out of it somehow. I don't know.
In case those people want to donate money still.
But it's, I mean, being reminded of that moment at this time, as I'm sitting for the first time in 30 years or so with Alan Zweibel, I mean, looking at 4 photographs in my virtual, whatever this piece of equipment is.
The Zoom.
My daughter, Kate. Even this I get to experience. I mean, son of a bitch, this is a great moment. Alan.
Yes, Norman.
It was early in the second season of SNL. I hosted. Were you writing at that time on the show?
Oh yeah, I was there for the first 5 years. So when you hosted the second year, yes, indeed, I was still there.
Oh, for crying out loud.
And I remember seeing your name on the board of the upcoming hosts. It was like the first or second show of that second season. It was early on, right?
Yeah.
And I remember all of us, we were just in awe, given who you were, what you did. And the first thing that was pitched, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dan Aykroyd had an idea about a family that was snake handlers.
Yes, we did that.
Snakes, and they were talking and going about their day with these snakes draped over their arms. And I remember a bunch of us saying, "You're going to have Norman Lear with a snake?" It just incongruous that this would be. But I remember that vividly, that sketch.
You know what I remember so vividly, Alan?
What's that?
What's his name? Our producer.
Lorne Michaels.
Lauren Michael. How do I forget Lauren Michael all these years? I was opening with a joke called Three Brothers, in which I was going to work with my daughter, Kate, who was then, I forget how many years, 14 years old or something. And just before I went out.
You were Dad, you were closing the show. This was the close, remember?
No, it was the close of the show, yes.
And they ran out of time.
Coming out for the last moments of the show. And Lauren Michaels said to me, "Norman, we have to cut Three Brothers. I'm going to run." He had a little film. I forget, I have a certain filmmaker. And I walked out to do exactly what my producer told me to do. And in the fourth row, sitting with her mother, is my daughter, Kate.
Oh.
With whom I always did Three Brothers. I always asked for a volunteer from the audience.
Oh.
So raises her hand. It was Kate. I picked her, and she and I did Three Brothers. And I did Three Brothers. And don't recall Lauren saying goodnight that night.
Oh my God.
And every reason to be upset with me, but there was no way I could deny that face in the fourth row.
My God, that's a beautiful story. I love that.
And the show was live, so
yeah, there's no this.
Yeah.
It's one of the great dad stories, and there is a book about Saturday Night Live, and it's actually in that book.
Is that? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's just like one of the great dad stories.
That's great. I love that.
I mean, any dad, not just my dad, but.
Oh, sure. No, a father and a daughter. I mean,
yeah.
Such a special bond.
But I want to keep it on this theme of picking yourself up off of the ground. And it's not as though comedy makes it all okay. You know, I don't want to be facile and Pollyannish and saccharine about it. But there is a role for people like you who have a certain look at the world, a certain perspective. And both of you overlap, by the way. I mean, you both loved Sid Caesar. You're both comedy writers. You're writers first, both of you. You have a lot of sensibilities that overlap, which is why I think it's a great match. And I want you to, Alan, start off by telling about North.
Usually that's the thing people build to. But
I understand.
Start off with that. You know, look, early on, I was lucky enough to have some success. SNL and its Gary Shandling show was a big success. And I had written a novella called North. North was a 9-year-old boy. That was the name of a boy who didn't feel appreciated by his parents. Okay, it was based basically on our son, who was 9 at the time. He would look at us at dinner, and you can tell by the expression on his face that he was going, "I think I can do better than these two." So he declared himself a free agent from his parents, went all over the world looking for the highest bidding sets of moms and dads. And the book did okay. It didn't do great. It did okay. I sent it to our friend Rob Reiner for a blurb for the book jacket. He read it and he said, you know, I'm a director now. He had done When Harry Met Sally and Spinal Tap, and he was in pre-production for A Few Good Men. He said, I would love to do this as a family movie. Well, this was music to my ears. I wrote a book. I took the family. We moved to LA. I moved them out there. I was doing the Shandling show, but this was after the Shandling show. They're out there now. And I'm adapting my own book into a screenplay. And it became a $50 million movie that Rob directed. Jason Alexander, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Bruce Willis, Elijah Wood. It was the first movie role for an 8-year-old actress named Scarlett Johansson was in it. It's the biggest night of my life, the premiere. I flew my parents out. There were 2 less Jews in Boca that night. I had out. And it's a big Hollywood party and a thing. And then the next day, the reviews come out. Now, Norman, I don't know if you remember Roger Ebert's review of North.
I remember
Your
Roger-
wallet, the way I do,
He keeps it in his wallet.
in my wallet, okay? But just as a reminder, this is what the biggest film critic in the country at the time, arguably, thought of my masterpiece. I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience insulting moment of it. Hated the sensibility that thought anyone would like it. Hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would actually be entertained by it. Now, on the surface, this may seem like an unfavorable review. Again and again, I think he sort of like, this was the first time that I was out there by myself, because it was usually a gang of writers on a sitcom. Even if I had created it, you were somewhat padded, okay? And I'm out there by myself, and we're living in LA, and it was embarrassing, and I let him have the power, okay? I let Roger Ebert devastate me. Robin, my wife, went to to Vicente Foods in Brentwood, and other housewives heckled her, okay? Our son, Adam, came home from school and said, listen, is it okay if we change our last name to Sorkin? Okay, so it was awful. And I let it get the best of me. But then what I learned from people like Norman Lear, and I looked at my idols, like Norman and Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, there's a culture. We're wired to do what we do. That is to put words in an order with the hopes that people will enjoy them. And I realized that, you know, once you do something, it's in the hands of a different God. You know, we have, you know, it's casting, it's timing, it's all of that, but it's in the process of doing it. That's what I love. That's what I've been doing since I'm 9. So I ultimately said, no, I'm not going to let this guy or guys like that do this to me. But I must say that years later, and I always wondered what it would be like if I ever ran into Roger Ebert. And about 10 years later, I had written a book, and I'm on book tour, and I'm in Chicago. And I was taken out to lunch, and about 3 tables over, I see Roger Ebert sitting there wearing this huge sweater with all the fall colors, gold and burnt orange and puke green, and it was dreadful. And he gets up and he leaves, and I excuse myself from the table. I get up and I now follow him. And it's like an out-of-body experience. I'm saying, gee, I wonder what Alan's going to do when he meets up with Roger Ebert. I follow him to the men's room, and now we're both at the sink and we're washing, and there's that mirror. And I say, Roger, and he looks into the mirror, and I see he's trying to place me. And then I go, Alan Zweibel, and the blood drains from his face. And I say, Roger, I just have to tell you that I hate that sweater you're wearing. And he looked at me, and we both started laughing, shook hands, and that was the end of it. I think that we have.
That's a great story.
Isn't that fun? But I think, Norman, apropos what John said, tell me if I'm wrong, I think that as a people even, there's a coping mechanism that we have in our comedy. It helps us deal with the world, pandemics, whatever's going on right now. What are our choices? Seriously, what are our choices? But okay, I'm going to get through this somehow. And I think that if we're wired to do what we do, we make it work for us.
I couldn't agree more. It all speaks to the what I call the foolishness of the human condition. There is nothing that's going on where you cannot find a laugh. There's a laugh everywhere.
Right. That's great. That's great. That's so true. Yes.
Norman, you first learned of the foolishness or thought of that phrase, the foolishness of the human condition, when your father went to jail and you were left. I think that's a very relevant story there.
I was 9 years old. My father got into trouble, and Sent him to prison at Deer Island off the coast of Massachusetts. And the night that, the day that he left, that evening or 2 evenings later, my mother was selling furniture because I was going to live with my grandparents. She and my sister were going to live someplace else. She was selling furniture. There was strangers in the house. And one of those strangers at that moment puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "Well, Norman, you're the man of the house now."
Wow.
And I like to think that that evening it occurred to me, but it might have been some years later when I thought about that moment. And I thought, oh my God, what a horse's ass. And even at that moment, and then the word foolish, because I couldn't say horse's ass out loud.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that's where the foolishness of the human condition.
Wow.
To the house now to a 9-year-old at that moment.
Norman, if Alan had come to you, after North, said seriously and asked for, he said,
I'd have punched him in the face.
really?
I would have deserved it.
You had some money in Castle Rock, right? Or whatever was the company producing it. But seriously, you had, what was it? The dumplings, Kate? Kate, would you chime in here to just remind Norman, I know it's been a long time, of some of the things that didn't quite win Emmys?
Oh, listen,
He knows them.
the toughest moments of my life was, I don't have the words to express, Alan, I'm so interested to hear your, what you feel about this, the essence of this story.
Sure.
I adored Nancy Walker. I didn't know Nancy Walker. I had seen her in an off-Broadway show. Two on the Aisle, I think was the name of it. I will never forget a moment in it as long as I live. I hope I live to be 192. I could never, ever forget this moment in this sketch. I felt indebted to her for the deepest of laughs that she gave me. I can see her doing what I remember so well right now. And then I got to do the Nancy Walker show.
Wow.
And I botched it. I mean, Nancy Walker was glorious, but the show was not good. It didn't work. I never cried harder. And I never felt the depth of despair that I felt. The 4 words on my mind are sinking Nancy Walker, 3 words. That I could love her so much and do so poorly for her.
Did you feel you had let her down? Was that?
She never told me I let her down. She never,
No, but for yourself, did you feel?
For myself,
Yeah, this was an opportunity to work with somebody that you admired and
I adored, admired, worshipped for the depth of her humor and her capacity for amusing me, let alone the world.
I remember as a little boy, my parents used to listen to a comedy album called You Don't Have to Be Jewish. And she was the star of the comedy album with Lou Jacoby and Arlene Galanka. And it was a lot of old Jewish jokes, but it fits into the theme of what we're talking about. It made people of all ages smile. So they showed that there was something universal that spanned the generations about humor. And I admired her as well. I thought she was fantastic.
So I'd like to make this almost if this were the 97th Street Y and Kate and I are in the audience. And the two of you were just talking to each other for the rest of this. And you know the theme. The theme here is after the Nancy Walker, right? How do you pick yourself up? Alan, after North, yes, you had an epiphany that you don't want to give him control. But for people, I love the idea of you guys giving universal messages. And for people who are watching this who may be down on their luck or have had something bad happen or whatever. I mean, how do you use humor? What have you learned that might be instructive in terms of life philosophy moving forward? How do you pick yourself up when you're down on the ground? You brush yourself off and keep going. What's the algorithm? So talk amongst yourself seriously about this theme.
Norman, you know, I remember Rob Reiner telling me once again a long time ago that it's the process that we remember. It's who we met, if we had a good time putting it together. It's not so much the product. The product, like we said earlier, is in the hands of a different God, and obviously we work very hard to want people to embrace it and to like it and to watch our shows or plays, read our books or whatever. But I know that there were some things that I worked on that were successful, but my memories aren't as cherished as some of the things that weren't as successful because I associated with people. Oh, that's when we met so-and-so. Oh, that's when we shot that scene in Hawaii. That's when we went editing together on Super Bowl Sunday and we were editing and watching the game on the other monitors. So there was something about, ultimately, that's what I remember. And I'll look at my bookshelf or I'll look at anything that has some of the things that I've done, and that's what I see. Is it the same?
I think what you're saying now is as much a sign of a healthy mind and heart as anything I know. It's the execution, it's the doing of, it's the getting it done. That's where the joy is. The applause that follows is wonderful, but it wouldn't be worth the while if the doing of it wasn't the totally meaningful thing it was.
We're in such sync over here. You know, my dad manufactured jewelry here in Manhattan. So he was on 52nd between 5th and Madison. And I used to come into the city on, let's say, holidays from school or weekends, and I would run errands for him. I was 12, 13 years old. And no matter where the errand went to or came back from, I made sure that I went by way of Rockefeller Center. I went into what was then called the RCA building and stood by the studio elevators because upstairs, this is the early 60s, Johnny Carson was doing the Tonight Show. There was a show, if you remember, called That Was the Week That Was.
That was the week that was.
There you go. It was that, and Buck Henry was in it, and David Frost, and was produced by Herb Sargent. And I remember I hung out there because there were people upstairs doing what I wanted to do someday. So now fast forward 12, 13-ish years, and I'm reporting to 30 Rock the very first day of Saturday Night Live. So I'm reporting to that very same lobby I'm walking into. So every dream that that kid had came true this day. And the reason I mention it is that's what I remember. Saturday Night Live was 45 years ago. And there have been a lot of fun things and very rewarding things since. That's where I start. I start with the little kid who wanted to go, well, I'd like to do this. And holy, it took me seriously. I'm here. You know, I can't think of a bigger thrill.
I feel the same way about moments working with Martha Ray, who I never got to know as a deep friend or sister kind of thing, but only as a talent. And oh my God, she made me laugh in places I didn't know existed in my life. And I remember one evening where we had a party for her. Ed Simmons and I.
Wow.
Family was in LA. Ed and I were in New York. We lived at the end of 41st Street. What is the name of that little area? Kate?
Hell's Kitchen on the west side?
On the west side. Jack Carter was there. All the writers, all the Mel Tolkins, and Schillers and Weisskopfs and everything. Oh my God. Martha, I can see her now sitting. It was a two-story apartment. I see her on the staircase singing now. God, there was nobody there, as funny as some of the guys were, and a couple of the gals, there was nobody there that would stop her for an instant. She was a little high and she was drinking, she was singing. And whether she sang 3 or 4 or 5, and they would have, everybody would have stood where they were for an hour and a half. But she sang for 20 minutes or something. And
You
I
know,
remember the knock on the door. I had a young man at the door,
Oh,
wondering if
man.
we had anything left over from a monologue we might have been doing.
if he asked if there was anything left over, I was really enjoying watching Alan's face as you were talking. You had him at Mel Tolkien, I think.
No. I was hanging on every word. I mean, I think, look, it's if you're a ball player, if you play for the Yankees now, you're supposed to know who Mickey Mantle is and hear all the stories about him. And Mickey Mantle was supposed to have heard all the stories about Babe Ruth. So I'm listening to Norman Lear talk about his contemporaries back then. I used to get the same sort of, were you friends with Buck Henry, Norman?
I knew him, but no, I can't say we were friends.
Well, he came and hosted SNL a lot, so we became friends. He became a mentor. And I mean, he was a man, unfortunately, he passed away last December, but he was writing until the very end. You know what I mean? So when I hear it,
I admired him. I couldn't have felt more strongly about him.
It's amazing. I mean, we say Norman said he's never going to retire. I mean, to what? People retire to write a book. That's what we do anyway. So we're going to, we just keep going, keep rowing, You said Henny Youngman. Those guys, they were so unique. The comics I used to write for before Saturday Night Live were Catskill guys. I was 21, 22, and there was the Morty Gunties and the Corbett Monicas of the world. And they used to take me to the Friars Club where I'd sell them jokes at the bar for $7 a joke. That's how it started out, okay? And years later, after I left Saturday Night Live, I didn't have an office anymore because other people were up there, 30 Rock. So I joined the Friars Club because they had a room upstairs that was like a lounge. I used it as an office. So one day, I'm walking to the Friars Club, which is on 55th between Madison and Park. I turned onto 55th Street, and for whatever reason, there was nobody else on the street that day. It was at this particular hour, it was abandoned. Out of a door about 100 feet in front of me pops Henny Youngman. He doesn't see me. I'm back there somewhere, so he thinks he's alone. That's an important part of this story. He comes out of that door. He walks across the street towards the Friars Club, gets to the curb. A pigeon flutters down, lands at his feet. He looks at it and goes, "Any mail for me?" Now, he didn't know I was back there. He thought he was talking to a bird. So, I mean, those guys, it was just a knee-jerk reaction. How can I be funny? And they did it even if there was nobody around.
Oh, that is.
You mentioned, never thought of that.
So in trying to bring it back to this theme, which I know I'm forcing a round peg into a square hole, but I'm going to try.
No, we'll get there.
That's okay. So he had that instinct, the comedic instinct. It was you couldn't keep it down. It was like a reflex.
He was alone with a pigeon.
Alone with a pigeon. Well, maybe you don't know that he didn't know the pigeon. I mean, that's the part of the story that we need some more facts about. But in any case, that's a reflex. You guys have that same reflex of a way of looking at life. And Norman, you talk about turning the screw in somebody's head 1/4 of an inch and making them realize something. You guys have this certain instinct.
The advice I would give to anybody watching right now, especially young people, is go with your gut. Be a listener. Make sure you've heard every word that could help you, and be open for whatever help might exist in somebody else's opinion. But once you have got yours locked, go with your gut.
Have you had the experience of having something bad happen, thinking, this is the worst thing ever. I cannot believe it happened. But then later on, looking back and saying, you know what? It was all part of the, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was all part of the formula that led me to this moment. And I'm happy in this moment. So I wouldn't change anything that came before. I mean, is this?
Yeah, no, you know, in 2 words, no regrets. I don't believe in regret.
I agree.
If I can enjoy this moment as much as I am enjoying this moment, getting as much from it as I am getting from this moment, how can I regret any moment that brought me to it? Any moment of 97 years
Wow.
that resulted in now,
Yeah.
right here, this moment, with you guys and seeing Alan with Zweibel again.
Can I just jump
That's
in here?
great.
Because I have to say that, you know, my dad has had a lot of success, but he's also had, you know, difficulties, failures, things that he wanted, like the Nancy Walker show and some other shows that meant a lot to him. But as a daughter growing up, it was never my experience that those negative times stuck with him for very long. He you know, and he has a philosophy, which you can talk about, Dad, and over next philosophy about life that helps in that way. And maybe you want to talk about over next.
Well, I have found myself saying for some years that there are 2 little words we don't pay enough attention to: over and next. When something is over, it is over, and we are on to next.
Wow.
And then if you can imagine a hammock in the middle between those 2 moments, a hammock between over and next, it could be the best way of expressing the meaning of living in the moment.
Wow.
That moment in the hammock between over and next is the moment.
So living in the moment, Kate, I'm so glad you piped in. I know you enjoyed listening, but I was just about to, I was about to say, Kate, as a daughter, you certainly have watched your father through many different ups and downs. And I know you gave one salvo at it, but I'd love to hear you talk just a little bit more about it, other than, you know, the over and next. I mean, you've seen him through.
Well, you know, as I knew this would be the theme of the show, I actually did a little research to remind myself of the shows that didn't work in my dad's career. They were so spectacular, every single one of them, I have to say. But I remember them. I mean, when I think of The Year at the Top and All That Glitters and The Powers That Be, and AKA Pablo, and the Baxters and the Dumplings, these are all, in my memory anyway, experiences that were so rich that he was doing what he loves. He always found actors that mostly worked from the theater, and that process of casting was, he was obviously a genius at it, but it was also a beautiful process for him. So that the takeaways from all of these experiences, even though it may have been a negative experience in the world's eye, the takeaway for him was that of collaboration, watching artists grow, watching his words come alive in actors' mouths. And so I think my experience anyway was that he just like over next, but creatively over next as well.
Wow.
Well, I love hearing that, because I had a reaction, a positive, glowing reaction to every title you mentioned, all the AKA Pablos. I mean, oh my God, how I think back with such affection about those casts.
And the powers that be,
And
when
the
the great
powers that
cast
be.
ever assembled.
Well, a lot of those people went on to great fame, and in Frasier.
John Forsythe and Holland Taylor and David Hyde
Wow.
Pierce.
David Hyde.
And Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who in his first role,
Wow.
you know, Peter McNichol. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
So once again, it is the process. It's what we talked about. It's what our lives are. This is what we do, who we meet, and we're putting it together, and what our lives become enriched from the moment of it. And so it is what Rob said. We're saying the same thing, I guess, in different words, you know. And what I'm learning is, it's amazing to me. I look at my idols, and Norman Lear is on my Mount Rushmore, and I look at the people whose careers, I'm 70, but I have idols, which I think is a good thing.
Child, he's a child.
That we don't lose our what's that?
You said you're a child.
Child.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a kid, but that we don't lose our sense of wonder. I think it's important. I think it's vital, as a matter of fact. And if you look at people's careers, we tend to remember the peaks, all the hits. And then if you look at it, if the chronology, you go, oh, they did that movie. Oh, he wrote that song too. Boy, that album stunk. But then he came up with this. So I believe that as quote unquote artists, there are times that you have to do something that maybe isn't what you wanted it to end up being, but it was a step towards the next thing, which did end up, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
we just keep on doing what we do.
Can I, this doesn't follow exactly what you said, but some
Please.
minutes ago, or maybe it's a half hour ago, I remembered something I wanted to say, and it wasn't, and we passed the moment, but
Okay.
it's been burning in my mind ever since.
Okay.
Larry Gilbert had died. And this was his memorial, which was one of the sweetest memorials I can remember, because he was one of the greatest, funniest writers that ever was. And I was sitting 2 seats from Sid Caesar in the front row, and Mel Brooks was on, and he was hilarious. Everybody had been just great. And Mel introduced Caesar, and Caesar was told he didn't have to come up to them. He could just stand up and do something and say what he wanted to say. And they brought him a microphone. He didn't have to go to the mic. Mel said, Caesar stood up, and he couldn't get a word out.
Wow.
And this is like a minute and a half. And I, in a fairly loud whisper, said, in Italian, Sid, in Italian. And he went into his Italian, and killed for another 4.5 minutes.
That's fantastic.
It was fabulous.
That's great.
Fabulous.
Well, I think that is what was so special about that moment for you was helping somebody else. Sid Caesar, who you knew well and who you remember past times, you knew what his strengths were, and you were helping him along as you've helped so many other people in their careers and in your career. And Alan, I know throughout your book, you had the same joy of collaboration. And so if you're thinking about, how you put in perspective ending up, on your butt on the floor at a bad time after something bad has happened, you have to turn that screw in your head a little bit, as Norman likes to say, 1/4 of an inch, and maybe discount the importance of external validation, which it's hard for us all to do. We all love external validation, and bring up the importance of the moment, the process, that hammock in between over and next, the process, the collaboration. And and it tells you what you should be doing in life, which is do what you're passionate about, do what you're enjoying, because if you're doing what you're enjoying, then, well, it's nice to succeed, but ultimately the time that you're spending is doing something that you're really enjoying, and you're going to get satisfaction out of that. And maybe in 200 years, somebody will realize what you did was better than Siskel or Ebert realized at the moment. And North will end up being the hit of the year 2228. But the point being, if you just value what we all say over and over again is important, family, friends, collaboration, doing work that you enjoy, that's probably maybe the way to bring it all together, or a way.
Well, apropos of that and what Norman just said about Larry Gilbart's memorial, when I used to write with Gilda Radner, okay, we were a writing team, and we had a great chemistry, and she made a rule that we would be platonic friends forever. Now, I was in love with her, so this was the last thing I wanted to hear, but I'm going, okay, if these are the rules right now, I'll live by them, but one day you'll open your eyes and see the glory that's in front of you. This lasted for 14 years. And so we did SNL, and we married other people, and years later, I was doing It's Gary Shandling show. And so she and I reconnected when we moved to California. And she told me, she came over the rented house I had and told me that she had ovarian cancer. And so I'm 36, she's not even 40. And I said, what do I do? And she said, make me laugh. And that was my role in my friend's life when she was sick. I would call her and tell her jokes. Gary Shandling and I would do a show every week and send her the cassette like a Hallmark card. And that was our code. I had to make her laugh. Her last appearance on television was at Gary Shandling show. And you talked about the face of adversity. She at first was nervous about coming on. She hadn't been on TV in 6-7 years. She looked different. She was afraid that the audience wouldn't recognize her. And just as I was saying, don't be silly, she said, but you know something? I have to come on your show. My humor is the only weapon I have against this, get ready to bleep, fucker. That's what she called the cancer. She personalized it. And she said, Zweibel, can you help me make cancer funny? She came on the show and she was nominated for an Emmy. And we thought she was in remission. It ended up she wasn't. My platonic friend, who, I was married with children, but she was my buddy. And I went to give blood one day at Cedars-Sinai, and I'm on the gurney, and a nurse comes over and hands me a pad and a pen. And I go, what's this for? And she said, well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. Write her something nice, she's having a tough time. And I wrote, Dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another. So, it was the essence of, you know what I mean? And it said everything, it summed everything up. I hope I answered your question, John.
You did, and I'm enjoying so much. Look at the expression on Norman's face, and he did that thing when he thinks something is really genuinely funny, which is a sort of like that thing.
I'm on it.
That's the most priceless story.
Oh, I'm on.
So I think we could go on forever, but I think we have to wrap it up. Alan Zweibel, Kate Lear, Norman Lear, I am so grateful for you for this discussion, which I just love it. I could go on forever. And in fact, I think I'll stay married to you, Kate, so we can keep talking tonight.
Let's
miracle in my life.
When next time in New York.
Oh yeah, and you know something? Next time I'm in LA and I have your email address, I'd like to keep in touch, Norman.
Please.
You'll hear from me.
And then I have to wrap up the podcast.
Oh, the hell with you. Okay.
Kate Lear, the greatest miracle of my life, truly meeting you. Norman, I adore you. Alan, I adore you too. You're amazing.
Same here, John.
Everybody
Thank you for
should
having
buy
me.
Laugh Lines. What's the tag of Laugh Lines?
My life helping funny people be funnier.
And I'm telling you, I read it in one day. I can't remember the last book I read in one day. It's hysterically.
I give it one day before I have a copy in front of me.
For everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us on CBS This Morning podcast. I'm Dr. John LaPook, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.